Hello, my name is Mark Gibson, and you're listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, a weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. So a very good morning to you, and you're welcome to today's Signpost webinar. I hope you're keeping safe and well wherever you're joining us from today. My name is Mark Gibson, and I'm head of the Teagasc Outreach and Innovation Programme. The series is brought to you by Teagasc in collaboration with Dairy Sustainability Ireland, the National Rural Network and Food Drink Ireland SkillNet. And today we'll be talking about hedgerows. And hedgerows, as you may know, cover about 4% of the Irish landscape, or almost 690,000 square kilometres. They provide an important wildlife habitat for flora and fauna throughout the country and are now being investigated for their potential role in carbon storage. And I'm delighted to welcome the Minister of State at the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, Pippa Hackett, who has responsibility for land use and biodiversity. Good morning, Minister.
Good morning, Mark. Thank you very much.
Very welcome to the Signpost webinar today. Great. And we're also joined by recently appointed Director of Teagasc, Professor Frank O'Mara. Good morning, Frank. And Pat Murphy joins us also from Wexford. Pat is going to help us with questions later on. So before we get started with our webinar, today is an important day because we're officially launching Hedgerow Week 2021. And Minister, we're delighted to have you here to do the official honours for us today. Perhaps you'd like to share a few thoughts on hedgerows and the importance of the important role they have in Irish agriculture and indeed the biodiversity of the country.
I'm delighted to actually. Thanks, Mark, and it is great to be here to launch Teagasc's Hedgerow Week. And I think last year we saw a week full of wonderful information. I think promoting the value of our hedges in the Irish landscape. And look, it really is thanks to events like this that progress has been made in raising the profile of hedgerows. I suppose we are quite fortunate in Ireland to have maintained much of our hedgerow network with the ecosystem services that they provide, in terms of carbon storage, wildlife shelter and food supplies. I suppose it is worth pointing out, though, that we have lost significant lengths of hedgerows over the past decades. And really, this is something we need to reverse, in this all-important decade of change for climate, biodiversity and so forth. So, I mean, it's apt really that this is, this event is happening at this very pivotal time, really. Look, the trees, I suppose, and shrubs that make up a well-managed hedgerow are a huge source of food for pollinators, for birds, for small animals, and some big ones if they can have access to it. And also, it's hedgerows act as a sort of nature corridors for wildlife to move around. They're also home for many species of wildlife, and that's important to think about that as a habitat rather than just a field boundary. For those bigger animals, again, hedges can provide shelter and shade, depending on the type of weather we're facing. And I suppose at this time of the year, it is lovely to see the red berries of hawthorn, holly, rose hips even, and even the black sloes and berries of ivy. Again, it's only possible, of course, if the hedge has been maintained in an appropriate manner and allowed to bloom and fruit during the year. So I think that's why, again, this webinar, this week, Hedgerow Week, is really so important to highlight that and the benefits of managing your hedge in a very productive way. I suppose from my department's perspective, the importance of hedgerows as a farmland habitat has been recognised through agri-environmental schemes since about 1994 with the first REP scheme. Since then, we've worked to improve and advance hedgerows measures and actions through REPs, through AEOS and now through the GLAS. And we are, working to develop that further into the next round of the AECM. These schemes over the years thus far have facilitated the planting of about 11,000 kilometres of new hedgerows and rejuvenated some 6,000 kilometres of other hedges. I mean, so it's quite a significant amount. But again, we do need to keep this work up and develop it further. So yes, the next round of the CAP and the new AECM will be more ambitious again in terms of action for hedgerows. And we are working and currently developing that, through our ecologists here in the department and in consultation with external experts to ensure that this progress continues. again, I suppose we are also lucky to be part of the, the All Ireland Pollinator Plan has been in place here in Ireland since 2015. And the first plan did have guidelines for farmers and landowners on how to, manage their hedges for pollinators, which was really, really useful. And as part of the new All Ireland Pollinator Plan that will run from 2021 to 2025, my department has funded a farmland pollinator officer who will work again to engage with farmers through my department and to continue to strengthen that message around the importance of hedgerows and pollinator friendly management practices. So look, this week's going to be all about understanding hedges better. And I think it is that better understanding among landowners, among farmers, among contractors that will build on the progress we have seen to date, and certainly deepening our understanding through research on projects such as Farm Carbon will continue this awareness and the value of our hedgerow network. So it's great to see the practical elements of the programme ahead this week. And I suppose it is worth at this point, whether it's hedgerows or trees, just to give a bit of a reminder that people need to think safely when they are dealing with hedges, trees and managing those, and, to remember to wear your PPE and obviously only carry out the work if you're trained and certainly able to do it. So look, I'll finish off on that and just to say, look, I really hope that you enjoy the week. We have the expert that is Catherine Keena today, and I'm sure next week as well, to deliver all the knowledge that is out there. And at the end of the day, it is about if we truly understand hedges better, we will have a better appreciation for the value of our hedgerows. So listen, thank you very much. Thanks to Frank and Teagasc for the invitation, and I'll pass back to Mark and enjoy the week. I'll try and tune in as much as I can, and if not, I'll watch the recording. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister, and thank you for those kind words, and indeed underlining the importance of hedgerows and the true connection that we have with hedgerows in Ireland and the heritage that's attached to them. I'd now like to invite Professor Frank O'Mara to say some words. Thanks again, Minister. Frank O'Mara, this is your first appearance on the Signpost webinar, so you're very, very welcome. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Mark, and thank you very much for the invitation to join you here this morning. And yes, indeed, it is my first appearance on the Signpost series. And look, I'm delighted that it's associated with a really important topic like Hedgerow Week. And I'd like to very much thank the Minister for her comments here this morning and for attending this event to launch National Hedgerow Week. So look, hedges, I think we all are so familiar with hedges here in Ireland. They're a really intrinsic part of the Irish landscape, and I suppose so familiarity is certainly something that we don't need with hedgerows in Ireland. In terms of their importance, I think there's a number of areas where I would see, obviously, as a source of biodiversity in themselves and as a shelter for wildlife, they're really important. They have an important role to play in climate change. For many, many years, farmers use hedges as a form of fencing and still do. And obviously they provide shelter for livestock. And I suppose, they really contribute immensely to the appearance of the Irish countryside. And, you'll always see that when you're flying home to Ireland and you're flying in, whether it's into Dublin or Shannon or Cork or Knock, the unique landscape that we have here in Ireland that is really defined by the hedgerows and field margins that we have. So they're really important, and I think because of those features that they have, it's really important that we mind our hedgerows and improve what's there, and also that we do plant more hedgerows and add to that stock of hedgerows that we have. And indeed, Mark, you mentioned yourself at the start that we have upwards of 690,000 kilometres of hedgerows in Ireland, and that is a huge figure. And I suppose what we need to try to do now over the coming years is add to that figure. And on our own farms in Teagasc, we are practicing what we're preaching here. We have planned to plant up to 25 additional kilometres of hedgerows on our own farms, and that's well underway. And I know the Minister was down in Moore Park recently, and she saw there that we have planted 3 kilometres of hedges in Moore Park in the last 2 years, and that's happening right around all our other research and college farms. And I suppose that's look, it's a small contribution, but if everybody was contributing in that way, we wouldn't be long increasing that 690,000 kilometre figure. That figure actually came from research that Teagasc did back in 2011 or 2012, and I think that was our first national map of hedgerows. We've been working on hedgerows for quite some time actually, and more recent work has shown that, you know, we have seen a decline in the area in the length of hedgerows in the country for the period between 1995 and 2015. Hedges were actually declining by about somewhere between 0.16 and 0.3% a year. There was evidence that was slowing down as we came to the end of that period, and hopefully that decline has actually reversed and that we are actually gone back into growing the length of our hedgerows. I think the other work that we're involved in that is going to be discussed next week is the farm carbon project that the Minister mentioned, and in that project we're trying to look at the quality in particular in relation to its carbon content of our hedgerows, both the above ground and below ground biomass. And look, that's an EPA funded project, and I think it's a very important project in relation to hedgerows. I guess other work that we have been involved with in relation to hedges is our collaboration with Devonish, and you know, Devonish have put a lot of effort into restoring and enhancing the hedgerows on their farm at Doubt, and we collaborated with them in terms of doing the LiDAR assessment of those hedges for them in Doubt, because that's an area where we have some expertise. So hedges are, you know, they are an important part of our program in relation to biodiversity and carbon, and will continue to be. And I suppose today what we're doing is launching Hedgerow Week, which is where we try to collaborate with many organisations involved, or that have some either an interest in hedgerows or are involved in the business of managing and planting hedges, and try to encourage, I suppose, farmers around the proper management and the enhancement of hedgerows. And so for that, we're really thankful to our country management specialist, Keena, who's, you know, known the length and breadth of the country for her expertise in this area. And Catherine really drives on this National Hedgerow Week. And look, we have a very, I think, good lineup of events next week, and obviously all virtual, but that maybe makes them a little bit easier for people to access in one way. And I certainly hope to tune into some of those next week, because I think they're going to be very interesting. And I hope that that many farmers get to hear the messages that we have in relation to how hedgerows can contribute on their farm in a very, very positive way to enhancing both the appearance and utility of their farms. So with that, Mark, I'll leave it and wish you well for this morning's seminar, and wish everybody involved in Hedgerow Week, both Teagasc participants and participants from other organisations, a good week next week, and hopefully you'll all consider that the effort will have been worthwhile by the time we get to the end of the week and we see the fruits of that in the following weeks and months ahead. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Frank. And I'm going to go straight across to Catherine Keena, who's going to tell us all about what's going to be happening next week in Hedgerow Week. Catherine, good morning to you.
Good morning, Mark and all. And again, I really appreciate both the Minister and our Director for their support in this week, and my colleagues. The most exciting part about this week is the collaboration. This is probably the only time I will be speaking, because we have all the experts from all angles, and I'll just run through them very briefly. And these will be in the form kind of panel discussions and small video clips of expertise. So on Monday, the 6th, we are talking about the state of Ireland's hedgerows, and a lot of people are very worried and interested about that. We have Lillian O'Sullivan, Teagasc Johnstown Castle researcher, Julie Larkin, a former PhD student now working with RPS. We have Monaghan County Council represented with Shirley Clerkin, and two hedgerow organisations, Mark McDowell from the Hedge Laying Association of Ireland and Alan Moore from Hedgerows Ireland. So that will be a very interesting discussion.
So that's a live discussion, Catherine.
That's a live discussion on Monday, 9:30 to 10:30.
Full details are on the Teagasc website. at the moment there for anybody who wants to register. I'll let you keep going there because I know we've quite a lot to cover this morning.
Tuesday, then we're coming on to biodiversity, a topic we're so familiar with. But again, we need all to understand how birds, bats, bees, butterflies use the hedges. So we have a presentation from Jesmond Harding from Butterfly Conservation Ireland. The Minister mentioned the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan, the Pollinator Officer, and we have Ruth Wilson with us. And we have the well-known author, broadcaster and journalist Éanna Launa, who's an all-rounder on all the aspects of hedges. On Wednesday then, we are coming back to the really important topic of hedge cutting with Francis Quigley, the Teagasc machinery specialist. And we have farmer Tony Mullins, who cuts his own hedges, Liam Hurley, a dairy farmer, but also cuts he's a hedge cutting contractor. Another large hedge cutting contractor, Pádraig O'Brien from Clare in Tipperary. And then we have the farming organisations with an interest in hedges, Anya O'Connell from IFA, Dennis Drennan, the dairy farmer, ICMSA. And we are delighted to have Susan Callaghan from NPWS, divisional ecologist, all with a huge interest in how to manage and how do we move on the better practice. And finally, on Thursday, another angle which some people find very fascinating is the foraging for food and the food from hedges. So we have Regina Sexton, who's a food and culinary historian from UCC, Rosemary Cusack, a local cookery demonstrator, and Mary White from Blackstairs Eco Trails, who forages for food and brings people with her. So very, very different. Some people will be interested in one, and some people may be interested in all the talks. So that's the brief introduction, Mark.
Okay, great. Thanks, Catherine. And look, huge interest in this morning's webinar. We have nearly 450 people joining us from across the country and indeed outside of the country as well. So obviously this is a hot topic, Catherine. Just to remind everybody, if you're new to the Signpost webinar, today's session is being recorded and will be available on the Teagasc YouTube channel in the coming days, and also available as a podcast if you'd like to access it through your podcast platform. And the presentations will be available on the website as well. So please do send us your questions and answers, or questions through the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen. And Catherine, I'm going to hand over to you for the main presentation now. So over to you. And we are a little bit tight on time, so Catherine, we'll appreciate if you can condense down the presentation if at all possible.
Thank you, Mark. So the focus today is simply on planting hedges. And I will delay a little on this slide because to me, this is the most important slide of the presentation in understanding hedges. And when I am talking about planting, but it also has implications for management later on. So the hedge on the top is our newly planted hedge. 2-year-old bare-rooted whips is what's recommended, 6 per metre. Now, normally in a double staggered row, but for the purposes of my little drawings, I put them in a row there. So there is a huge difference then in how you manage it from day one. In fact, before day one, before you pick the species, before you select what species you pick. And we need to understand how a whitethorn, which is the predominant hedging species, but similar for all the other species and trees. On the left, if we cut it back day one and keep cutting it back, the one stem multiplies every time we cut it. This has been understood way back on the literature that John Feehan talks about, where long ago people understood the value of whitethorn because it responded to trimming. And it just, every time it's cut, buds come beneath the cut and it multiplies. So if we want a hedge which is managed, because a hedge, don't forget, the topped hedge is not a natural habitat, it is a managed habitat. So to maintain it as I suppose maybe we think of as a hedge, we must cut it from day one, cut as an inch at a time, like inch it up to get it thick and growing well. And then obviously to leave, then eventually to get to at least 1.5 meters as high as the hedge cutter will cut. But it is important to cut the growing point every year to keep it as a hedge, except for the occasional flowering thorn tree that's left. And from day one, a tree guard is cut on one of those every whatever number of meters, depending on the scheme or depending on your preference. And that new hedge then can be easily got into a triangular shape, A-shaped triangular shape, sloping from a wide base to the growing point. But the growing point must be nipped, and that is the perfect hedge from a hedging point of view. It can be difficult when we talk about getting that shape into existing hedges, which I'll come on to in a moment. Now, that's number one with the little green star. That's absolutely perfect. Equally perfect, and be clear about this, because I suppose I talk a lot about the management of that hedge, because in general farmers tend to want that hedge, but they're equally, I love the escaped hedge on the right hand side. So this is where the white thorn is left to do what it wants to do, and it grows into a single stem with a mature canopy. Now, I've exaggerated the diagrams obviously, but that is fabulous, and that's equally, and I think on every farm we should have some topped hedges and some escaped hedges, because both have very different values and both can contribute. So the escaped hedge, untopped hedge, or tree line. And as I said, if you look out as you drive away from wherever you are today, you will clearly see that's topped, that's an escaped hedge. You know, our old mature hedges can be either, whether they're 200 years old, 2,000 years old, or planted today. Now we come down then to the problems, the problem line, the bad practice. The bad practice is where that topped hedge is short back and sides, under 1.5 meters, no flowering tree, flat topped, down to an inch of its life. You know, maybe on top of a bank and it may be only a foot high. That is not, and that bad practice has got a bad name for our, we'll say, hedgerow management for our normal topped hedge. Equally bad, and this is my biggest concern about new hedges. What happens is they're often let grow up to a point where, oh, we must cut the hedge, and then they are topped. Or worse still, those old mature escaped hedges full of beautiful old trees, 200 years old, are topped at, you know, 1.5, 4 or 5 foot high. And then what happens is it pulls whatever little bit of growth at the bottom, it pulls it up into the to the point where you cut, and you have the upside down toilet brush hedge. And then if that's flailed year after year, you're really, it's on its way. That's the way to get rid of the hedge. Just a small point there, it's probably not the worst thing, but I think again, it's important to understand there's a move at the moment to get hedges, the height up. It is not the best practice to just let it grow up in 1 year. My picture on the bottom right shows that, you know, the better way would be to inch it up. Okay, so I think that's really important. So before day one, before you plant, decide which hedge you want. Either are valid, but what happens is the wrong management happens because people mix up the two hedges. Okay. And again, just to understand how the trees and shrubs grow, this apical dominance, it's that the whitethorn and all other hedging species and trees want to grow up to being a single tree. So you can see there in the example, unless we cut it off, it will, that's what it wants to do. And that is fine, provided we manage for that. That is absolutely fine. As I said, I would like both. And again, it's the same when it comes to cutting hedges. But the really bad thing, as I said, and this comes from way back out of the reps book from the very beginning. This was understood, but we failed to get the message over. I think that was the problem. So you can see there clearly the picture on the right where the hedge cutter cuts. That's where it sprouts from. And again, in the little diagram there, if you keep coming back to the same point every year, you are just killing the hedge, because the other way, it's okay, little enough and is good, provided you cut above last year's cut, because then you have 5 new shoots all developing. But if you're coming back to the same point every year, you are weakening and devastating the hedge. And there's the classic upside down toilet brush hedge. But to be honest, an awful lot of hedges in the country are like this. That's probably a very light one. But from now on, and I would not look at a hedge until this month. You cannot see the structure. Everything looks good in the summer. Everything looks good. So December, January, February is the only time you can look at a hedge to see the structure. And what has happened is those old mature hedges, which are 200 years old, if they're cut at the metre and a half high, you see this big stump of a tree and this little fringe on top, and it can look good during the summer, but they're the ones that need to be brought back to ground level if you're doing anything with them, but not to keep cutting at the same point. Okay. So then for planting, then again, the point there, a picture on the left, it's planted, lovely 18 inches high plant, and you go back and cut it an inch from the ground day one, and year two, then there's that second cut, or that may even be the third cut there, where you keep cutting back and multiplying, and then you will end up with the hedge on the right hand side there, which is, you know, dense to the base. So we're talking about planting today. Number one, decide, do you want a topped hedge with a dense base and containing your occasional thorn trees, or the escaped untopped tree line linear woodland, whichever word works best to explain what we're talking about there. And then that depends then on what species you pick. So these species suit, these species, the native trees and shrubs thrive with cutting, but can also be left as a tree. So again, they're extremely useful in a hedge. So we're talking the tree thorn species, the white thorn, black thorn, holly, and to be honest, we need them for structure in the hedge. The spindle, gelder rose are beautiful, but on their own they would not be structurally good. And the hazel, and just to put in there, the buckthorn is not found all over the country, kind of limestone, and it is the only plant that the brimstone butterfly uses. So it's just an interesting hedging species that's of critical importance. So these are the species that can go in either hedge, either the topped hedge or the escaped hedge. And then we have the climbers, which we probably don't count as for in planting. Again, I would be very wary about putting anything into the hedge that would be ornamental. That is not good, and it is a danger, especially with the rose. You can have the Rosa rugosa rather than the Rosa canina, and again, it is dreadful out on a farm. So they are generally species that aren't available, but it's just worth putting them in there to remind them. Hopefully, they will come in time into hedges. And then we have the trees, and I just put them into two groups there. We have the large trees and the mid-sized trees. But the very large trees, the ash, the oak, obviously we're not planting ash at the moment because of the ash dieback. The oak, I've put the heights there, rough heights of all the trees, but they're some of the very large ones. And they, obviously you would only put them where they can suit, but they're in all our old hedges. So again, they could be, if providing we're not topping them, they could be, you know, they're beautiful, and could be included, or they could be put in a corner of the field as a grove of trees. And then you have the kind of the mid-sized trees, the alder, the birch, the cherry, the rowan, or mountain ash, crabapple, white beam. The elder, probably we don't normally sow it, but it's a beautiful one for biodiversity in the hedge, not good for the structure of the hedge. So you always have this balance. And the beautiful strawberry tree, which is locally only, occurs only locally. So again, these ones are fine in the escaped hedge, but only only occasional in the topped hedge. And to be honest, because our experience in the past, when people got the message to leave a tree in the hedge, what in general, they tended to put too many trees and then cut them down, or even where they did put these kind of trees, which are beautiful, they omitted to leave the whitethorn. They didn't see the whitethorn as a tree, which is the most valuable tree in a hedge. It fits into the hedge. So just be very careful if we're putting trees into the hedge, know what we're doing, and only after we've allowed a whitethorn in each hedge. Native provenance, it means seed, plants grown from seed, grown in Ireland from Irish trees, best for biodiversity support, rural development. I should say no more about that because the Signpost webinar next Friday, we have 2 people who will explain better than I can the value of native provenance trees and hedging stock and how to reduce health risks to them. So we have Joe Gowan, CEO of the Woodlands of Ireland, and Maria Cullen, Chair of the Society of Irish Plant Pathologists. And I shall leave that topic to them, other than to say that, you know, there is a body of people trying to progress this and support it, and it's not an easy job. So coming back to the planting then, the practical side of, now again, so line out if you're putting it in the middle of a tree with a wire a wire or lime or whatever, or twine. It is always useful to use the digger to loosen the soil, but it really makes it easier to plant, to turn over the soil first. There's no need to spray once we're managing it properly afterwards. Again, planting them there 6 per meter, keeping the plants in the bag, don't let them dry out. If you're going to have them for a long time, keep them in the ground if you're going to have plants for a few weeks. Again, number 1 there on the left, identify your whitethorn trees and other trees if they're in the hedge. On day 1, put a tree guard on them, because it's amazing how the hedge grows so quickly. It can be hard to find them the second year. People often find that. So put on the tree guard, have a couple of tree guards, decide how many trees you're going to have in your 100 meters. There may be a requirement in a scheme, or you may just choose. And again, it's fair to say that trees are not good for the structure of a hedge, especially big trees. And this is why I kind of favor the small, and the whitethorn being the one that will fit in there very well. But it's always a compromise. Life is a compromise, and biodiversity certainly is, when we're trying to fit in all these species in the hedge.
So we've a question coming in there around the spacing that you'd recommend there. Is a six per meter, that's roughly about a foot apart, is it? Roughly?
Yes, 6 per meter in a double staggered row would be a foot apart and a foot between the rows.
Okay. And what do you have any advice in terms of the plastic as to when that can be removed?
Wait till my next slide, Mark.
Okay. Jumping ahead.
This was last year down in Galway, and we used the silage plastic, cut off the 4-foot strip and rolled it out, pushed it down over you can see the planting there on the bottom, and pushed in the sides. Okay, now a very new exciting development has happened. I just finished here on this one. The purpose of the plastic and the pruning, we've explained the pruning already, but there it is in evidence. Instead of 1, now we have 5 or 6, and multiplies up each year. And then I just finish off on the fencing as well. Hopefully, if you don't have rabbits, is the biggest worry actually. I would tend to plant, if as long as it happens as late as possible, so that there's less time for the hedge sitting in the ground. So if it's planted in February, it is only kind of 6 weeks to get away before the rabbits, and as long as you can keep the hedge ahead of the rabbits. But if necessary, I'd hope it wouldn't be necessary in most cases, but to put down the temporary or electric wire can help. Okay, and then obviously fencing from livestock. So now coming on to my exciting new development, and I will credit my colleague Andy Boland, who kept saying to me, you have to do something about this, the silage plastic. So we have investigated with Maize Tech the use of compostable film. So here it looks the very same, pictures are much the same. Rolls were made up specially for us to try it out. We tried it out. On the left is Johnstown Castle, and on the right is a farm. So just 2 comments there, and I talked to Riach Fox there yesterday. Very extreme. That was just when it was planted there, but he was very, very, very excited about it. How good the hedge has done. Now, the interesting point there is in Johnstown Castle, they had not used plastic before. Maybe they hadn't wanted to do the the cutting back. But equally, there are people, and I'm not sure if that was the case there, who didn't want to use the plastic. So now that the compostable film is there, it's opened a whole new area of people who may have not wanted to use the plastic. On the right-hand side is a farm where plastic has been used in many years. So the comparison is very useful in the sense that it is acting after 1 year exactly the same as it's exactly as effective as the plastic, as the silage plastic. So it's kind of, we tried 40 micron and 30 micron. So I think, so that's, and yes, now is the time to mention that we are going to, for all the farmers planting over the next, this winter, we want to get pictures in, and we shall give details of that later, where to send in a photo. It's a competition. Now, we won't be judging the quality, but of the farmers who send in a photo of hedges planted this year into a website, it will be easy to do. We've done it before with competitions, and we will pick out one lucky winner who will receive a roll of the compostable film. So that could be very interesting. It's just to kind of encourage the people thinking this new way. So I don't know if that answers your question, Mark, but compostable.
Yeah, no, it is a question that came in through the
excellent. Yes.
We have 2 minutes left, Catherine.
Okay. Yeah. So again, that was the site there. So working perfectly. And again, you can see how it's cut back there. Just a couple of points on REAP to be very clear, that anybody, REAP was a pilot program, so it wasn't trying to do everything in this year and next year. There was a payment for the field score, but what I'm honing in on here is there was a capital payment number 2 for planting trees and hedges. Okay, so just to update you on where that is, there's about 3,800 or something like that farmers in REAP, and you I kind of look first, I saw only 524 planting hedges, but there is a reason for that, because the farmers, there was only 10 hectares, it was a pilot, and the 10 hectares tended to be the small extensive species rich fields which didn't need hedges. So in a larger scheme, I know from my own research that farmers will go for hedges a lot more, if you know what I mean. There's always a place on the farm, but it's usually maybe around the farmyard or in the big fields. So these farmers are planting this winter. So I just want to be very clear that they know what they are allowed to plant. There was a lot of they had to plant. That was the reason why the numbers aren't so high there. They were restricted where we could put them just in this pilot. So the REAP requirements are there: prepare the ground between November and March, plant the double staggered row. Again, we're back to 6 plants per metre, but just one. And one important thing there, it says no one species should make up than 7 of the total plants, but that's advisory. That's should rather than must. Okay, so 6 species from the approved species list. Native provenance where possible, that has been changed, because again we have this problem of trying to get enough native provenance, but there is lots of whitethorn, I understand. So, and that the fact that the species, you're not restricted to 7 of the total plants there, there is an opportunity to plant predominantly whitethorn with a small number of the other species, which may or may not be native provenance this year, and hopefully that will improve in the future. So look, that's the details there, but just to be clear that for REAP, farmers must follow the REAP rules, okay? And they are the species from the REAP, but they're similar to the ones I showed for the hedges. And again, I talked about now, it doesn't, where possible, source trees of native provenance. And again, so this is what we're aiming for. This is my final slide. All these new hedges and existing hedges are good for biodiversity, food, water, shelter, etc., as has been said before. So, Garamahagi.
Thank you, Catherine. And that leaves us some time to get through the question, because we have a huge amount of questions coming in, a lot of interest, particularly on the compostable film, Catherine, around the costs there. And I suppose one person is asking how necessary is the film in the first place.
Very good point. Yeah. Well, I suppose I've been at this a long time, and I saw an awful lot of hedges planted over the years, which 5 or 6 years later, you say, oh yeah, there might be one there under the grass. In my experience, it does not work unless you either get a good hedge or you mulch. There's nobody probably wrong to say nobody, but very few will weed by hand sufficiently, because don't forget, it's keeping the space. When you go think back on those pictures, it's holding the nutrients instead of going to your 10, 20 tons of grass. It's keeping the water. It's physically, you can see the horn branches trail along the ground. But the compostable film and the pruning go together. If you're going for the escaped hedge, it's a different, that's different, okay? So that's my point. We need to be very clear. Are we trying to get that dense space, or are we happy with and either is fine, but follow accordingly.
No, it's just a question I have about some of these films. Some of them I know are biodegradable, they'll break down, but they're not, they're still made from a plastic. Are these films, are they actually some sort of a cellulose or type of
yeah
film?
I understand compostable film, and it's similar to, no, I understand.
Very good.
Yeah, it's following on from the maize plastic, Mark, that has changed to compostable film.
Great. Well, Pat is probably going to join us now for some questions, but maybe just tell us a little bit more about the competition, Catherine.
Yeah, so farmers who plant this winter, we're just interested in seeing what's going on out there. We know the REAP farmers, we know there are farmers in the NPWS Farm Plan scheme, but equally, I think we all know, and in particularly on the dairy farms, that lots of people are talking about planting hedges with outside schemes. So we just want to capture what's going on, and just send us in a photo and the length of the hedge. We'll have the details on it, and as I said, we'll pick a lucky person then to get the role of.
So you can find out more details on the Teagasc website. Just before I hand over to Pat, I know there's a question there in relation to contractors and training of contractors, and what's happening there. What sort of engagement does Teagasc have with contractors around hedge cutting?
Well, we're going to engage very much on Wednesday, Mark. We have worked with them in the past. My own research shows that maybe 80% of farmers use hedge cutting contractors, but most of the farmers leave it to the contractor. And I know the contractors do what they think the farmers want, and they all do what they think the neighbours want. So I think it's not rocket science. Anything I'm talking about there is so simple. And I think that's the problem. People think, oh, there's nothing to it. And if there is, so it's the communication, Mark, I think, even more so than the training for everybody, from the people who say, oh God, that farmer's hedges are really neat and tidy, and rather than saying, do you know what I'm getting at? It's the communication, and very important from outside farming, as well as within, to know what's the right thing to do.
Okay, Pat, a lot of questions coming through there.
There is huge amount, and as you say, a huge amount in relation to the plastic. To get away from that, there's a question: what's the evidence that planting and managing hedgerows delivers benefits for biodiversity? And I suppose, what's the rationale in introducing shrubs that maybe don't exist in locally in hedgerows in a particular area?
Okay, I suppose the evidence for any biodiversity is, if the habitat is right, they will come. That is accepted to be. We manage the habitats rather than managing the species, if you know what I mean. And the species will come. So we know what is in hedges. So repeat that will. So it's just if the habitat is right, the associated species will be there. It will take time. A new hedge is not the same as a 200-year-old hedge, for mosses and lichens and all that, but we have to start somewhere. I would clearly say the older ones are better. And your second question was, the
role of introducing species.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would totally understand if somebody wants to stick with what's growing well. I heard somebody yesterday talking about an alder hedge. It's growing well. It's a wet place. That's why I personally wouldn't be as much into the number of species. But I think certainly then I wouldn't be going outside Ireland. So in other words, the native species is really important. And if you want to bring down that to local, I would be supportive of that too.
Yeah, a very specific question from Michael Hennessy. For new hedges, how damaging are cleavers and the base and growing up with the hedge? And sometimes they seem to be totally covering hedges.
Yeah, again, anything that if the hedge is doing well, if you get the hedge away, that in 3 years you cannot get into it with the pruning and compostable film technique, no plant, like you could say the same about bramble, you could say the same about other weeds, they will kill a struggling hedge. But if you can get the hedge right, no weed is a problem. And they're obviously adding to it as well, if you know what I mean.
Okay, just a question then about a rotational approach to cutting hedges and what's best practice.
Okay, well again, we must always talk about the two types of hedges. So the escaped hedge, where we're side trimming only and never topping, that certainly can be done on a rotational basis. And similarly with the topped hedge. Personally, I'm more inclined to go little and often. I've seen terrible damage done in the past, leaving them for 5 years and then mutilating them. Even, personally, I like little and often. And if everything else is right, that works. Having some escaped hedges on the farm and having the individual thorn trees in your topped hedges, that you will have, it'll be a balance.
There's a question here as regards county councils outsourcing cutting of hedges, and I suppose alluding to the fact that some of the hedges are cut down very heavily. And I suppose there's an issue there as regards the safety and management in relation to that, but also I suppose, is there a question as to whether there should be a different strategy for managing hedges that are by the roadsides versus those that are back in the fields? And I suppose personally, I would hate to, I've said this before, I would hate to live in a country where we have 10-foot high hedges on every roadside where you can't see the countryside.
I think there's a compromise path. Look, number one, safety is first. The minister even mentioned it there. Safety is first. But I think there's a lot of hedges cut that don't need to be cut. Or, we don't want everything left the same. We want, for a variety is good from a biodiversity point of view. I still think there's quite lots of opportunities as I go along and see hedges, where certainly not a safety issue. And I wonder that there couldn't be the single whitethorn tree left. I'm not talking about oak trees. I wouldn't plant any big trees in it. And similarly for the height, variety is good. We need to think, and certainly county councils and anybody cutting hedges, should never cut them without thinking. That's the point. Can they do it better from a biodiversity point of view, landscape point of view?
Catherine, we have a question in relation to the permission that farmers have to remove hedgerows and replant elsewhere. What's your view on that?
I would say if we went back to never having removed a hedge, we wouldn't have the industry we have today. I go back to where I worked in County Cavan as an advisor, doing the area aid long ago and the half-acre fields on the map. So there is a happy balance, isn't there? And, there's a happy medium. But I would stress a new hedge is not equal to an old hedge. The same length for length, which is what farmers have to do. We really should try not to remove them. But I wouldn't like that to be an absolute no. And since 2009, if a farmer removes a hedge, it has to be replaced. And I would say overnight that has been far more effective than any legislation. If not that nobody's suggesting we'd bring in a ban on doing it, but it really makes people think. And before, don't forget, they were paid, and we were advising them to clear the hedges before, and they were paid to do it. So, and that would have been the thinking, and immediately that came in under cross compliance. It makes it, I think it's very effective, and it does leave. There are cases where maybe it is the right thing to do, to take them out. And average field size, I would come back to there as my metric for whether it is way offline or a genuine case.
And in relation to the hedge cutting ban from between the 1st of March and the 31st of August, there's a question here in relation to the fruit, the effect that might have on the fruit available to birds and wildlife during the winter period. Is there Is there a contradiction there, or?
Yeah, in the ideal world, again, like planting the hedge, I'd do it in the last day of February. But with 80% of hedges, or maybe more in part of the country, being cut by contractors, that is not realistic. So I think, you know, and also if you are managing the topped hedges that I spoke about and side trimming the other ones, leaving them for, there won't be a lot of fruit on the part where you're cutting, if you know what I mean. Again, what's really killed us is where it's done badly, you know. And so to answer your question, if I had a hedge cutter, and I would cut them in February, yes. But it's if everything is done right on the farm, it's not the most important issue.
And of course, it's not possible to get every hedge cutter to just confine the cutting season to February. An interesting comment here about the hedgerows in your background there, Pat.
Yeah. I've lost my usual background. It's disappeared. So I have a nice neat one on one side and a more escaped one, and then coming up the
one of our very observant viewers.
Yeah, there's a comment in there about our poor bramble. Is it an outlawed species, or is it something that we should be appreciating a lot more?
Oh, sure, it's super from a biodiversity point of view, and the food people, you know, we all pick blackberries from a childhood memory point of view, you know. But again, I keep coming back to the point. People have said the hedge is covered in and you can see them are all over the place. A hedge that has been whacked and over managed is very likely to be covered in bramble. The hedges I showed there, the very, you know, lovely 15-foot tall, or any of the managed right, bramble is not a problem. So we're coming back to the point of get the basics right. Some bramble is fabulous, you know. I know it jumps out into the field maybe by 20 feet a year, but again, if everything is managed right, it's not a problem.
There's a question there as to the management and the possibility of hedging on top of earthen banks. And what's your recommendation there?
I would just be very careful. The earthen bank, don't forget, is something that has been there maybe 200, maybe 2000 years, is full of possibly carbon, but from my point of view is full of mosses and lichens, and is likely to be the one spot on the farm that has never been sprayed or fertilized, you know, up on top of the bank. So it can contain the most rarest and most valuable biodiversity on the farm. So, you know, I know long ago it would have been said, you get the digger in and turn the bank upside down, and that would be the easiest way to grow the hedge. Some banks could be worth keeping in their own right, but if you want to plant a hedge on the bank, I'd probably to get the hedge to grow, I'd possibly put it at the base of one of the sides of the bank. So again, it depends on personal choice, but I would just stress the value of banks from a biodiversity point of view, with or without a hedge.
There's a specific question in relation to tillage farmers liking to see things neat and tidy and cutting down hedges. How do we get the message out there better to, and I suppose not just tillage farmers, it's all farmers, to try and get that better management of hedgerows?
I suppose that's our job, isn't it? And that's what this week is about, to try and see where they can. And, you know, maybe margins are an option there on tillage farms too. Do you know what I mean? We need to, it doesn't have to be all about hedges, but it certainly does have to be about biodiversity, space for nature somewhere on the farm.
Number of questions, Councillor, coming through in relation to the county councils and Irish Rail and their role in hedgerow management. And I know a lot of it from their perspective is safety management. But what level of engagement is there with those bodies?
They wouldn't be our remit, I suppose, Mark. Yeah. I work with people who work with them in Hedgerows Ireland and that. So look, I think the fact that biodiversity has come on our radar in the last year or two mainstream compared to the last 20, 30 years that I've been working at it, I mean, is affecting everybody, the farmer and hopefully Irish Rail and everybody. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I can only be hopeful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, look, I think the fact that we have nearly 500 people joining us this morning is a testament to the importance that hedgerows play and their role in protecting biodiversity.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I think there's more comments coming back in. I think my background is generating mixed views. Michael Hennessy, our tillage specialist, likes it, but others, I think, don't think it represents a good example of the Irish countryside. So, can please some of the people some of the time. Just in relation to a question there in relation to ungrazed margins around hedges and how important are those to add to the overall biodiversity component of field margins?
Hugely. I nearly like field margins as much as I like hedges. So, and they could be, you know, standalone margins in the tillage field there behind you either, you know. So we definitely need a place for our grasses to grow. Our, you know, on the intensive dairy farm or on the tillage farm, the one habitat that's missing is the old grassland, the clumps of cocksfoot, you know, and timothy, and that's where you have the spiders overwintering, etc., etc. So we need those strips of grassy margins. Now they do need to be cut and maintained as grass, because otherwise you're talking about an extended hedge. So whatever width your hedge is, we really do need grassy margins as well. For you know, but that's a separate habitat and needs to be managed to keep it as a grassy habitat. So that's another day's talk.
Question, Catherine, in relation to hawthorn hedge, where gorse has grown up through the hedge. Is there value in the gorse, or
there's value in it, but it is aggressive. It takes over. I mean, I would rather not have it. I would rather not have it taking over. But it's a job to get it out. So again, I think sometimes it's there because there's been burning in the past, not always now, but it's not a favourite in the hedge.
Yeah, it's not easy to manage or digging it out.
And the more you cut it, the more it grows. So it's a difficult one.
There's a question there in relation to the legal protection for hedgerows. And I think it was insinuation that there isn't, but there is legal protection.
Well, I suppose we talked about the cross compliance and you having to replace, and then there's the EIA, the Environmental Impact Assessment for Agriculture, where if you are removing more than 500 meters or creating a new field more than 5 hectares, which is more likely actually, that you must look for permission from the Department of Agriculture. So that's the law. Yeah, that is the law. But if you count that protection, I suppose if it's less than that, there isn't legal protection, would be fair to say.
Mm-hmm.
And a question there in relation to tackling knotweed and other
really
things that invade your hedgerow.
Really important, yeah. And I suppose our message to farmers is try and see if any of this strange, you know, Japanese knotweed or anything funny, just find out, make sure you know what it is. And my message is don't touch it until we, you know, at least it's not easy and it needs to be done very carefully or we'll spread it. So yeah, we need to be on the lookout, advisors and farmers and other people, to spot it, number one, and then we can talk about treatment, which is another story and a difficult story. It can be done, but the far more important thing is not to spread it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we're just coming up on time now. Catherine, maybe just remind us next week the days that events will be taking place.
Okay, so Monday is the state of our hedges, which is what we've been discussing here. Tuesday is the biodiversity in hedges. Wednesday is the hedge cutting, and Thursday is the food from hedges. And then that leads on to our own Signpost webinar on. We'll culminate the hedgerow week with the Signpost webinar on Friday.
Great. And
and Maria Cullen, yeah.
There's a very obvious link there on the Teagasc landing page, so you can just click straight into that, and that gives you all the details. But you do need to register for those.
For each event, Mark,
to click into them. And the details of the competition, I think they'll be up later today on the website. Will there be?
Yeah, okay. And we'll have it next Friday as well. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Well, Catherine, thank you so much. We had a lot of questions coming from both of us there today. So I think people really appreciated the practical advice that you're able to give. And if people want to find out more, look, there's lots of publications available on the Teagasc website, but I imagine you encourage people to talk to their advisor as well if they have further questions on their own particular situations. So look, I just want to say thanks, Catherine, for today's presentation, and Pat, thanks for helping with the questions today, and also thanks to our Minister, Pippa Hackett, and Director of Teagasc, Frank O'Mara, for joining us earlier on. So we're now officially in Hedgerow Week, so we encourage you all to try and find out a little bit more about hedgerows during the week. So with that, I just want to say thanks to Yvonne Maher for helping in the background today, and our series producer, Andy Boland. And a reminder that all of the previous webinars are available on the Teagasc YouTube channel, as well as the podcast channel as well. And today's presentation will be available on the Teagasc website. So thanks again to everybody, the huge crowd that we had today, huge interest in this particular topic. So no doubt you'll get lots of interest next week, Catherine, during Hedgerow Week. So thanks again, everyone.
You've been listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, the weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. Don't forget to join us live every Friday morning for our latest webinar. For more, visit teagasc.ie. And you can also rate, review, and subscribe to the Signpost Series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm Mark Gibson, and thanks for listening.